Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm Heather Landy. I'm an executive editor with Quartz and editor of Quartz at Work, our edition all about the modern workplace. I'm here today with Christian Ulbrich. He's the president and CEO of JLL, which buys, builds, occupies, and invests in a wide variety of assets, including industrial, commercial, retail, residential, and hotel real estate. Christian has been in leadership roles at JLL for over a decade now, and we're pleased to have him here with us today. Christian, let's start big picture. Will COVID-19 forever change commercial real estate?
Well, I guess the biggest change to commercial real estate was actually technology coming into our life. The internet and the ability to work from remote places. COVID will be an accelerator of that trend, which we have seen due to technology before. But it is quite meaningful, the changes, because we're accelerating now so much.
Yeah, so how are you handling that? What is your plan for preparing for and managing for that acceleration in these trends?
Well, I mean, for us, obviously, it's quite important to note that people are keen to get back into the office. I mean, we recently surveyed 3,000 employees from the technology sector, and over 65% of them said they are really keen to get back into the office. And so what we have to do for ourselves and for our clients is to prepare a really safe and welcoming environment, because once people are getting back into the office after being locked at home, most of them locked at home for a couple of months, they really need to have a great first day experience when they come back into the office, so that this is then continuing and that positive momentum. And so that is what we are really focused on. And there is not one size fits all. You have to really look at the very specific situation of those office buildings our clients are asking us to deal with. You know, as you can imagine, it makes a big difference whether you sit in a 60-story high-rise building in downtown Manhattan, or you're sitting in a kind of low-rise office park in a suburb. It provides different challenges, and we have to accommodate those.
Yeah, absolutely. What do you think is driving the interest in people coming back into the office space? It's certainly been an interesting and at this point pretty lengthy experiment with work from home for a lot of us. What do you think the office still holds appeal for?
I think the office is really almost a marketplace within the company. I mean, you meet your colleagues and you have social interaction, whether that is just for having a nice chat with a colleague or whether that is for professional purposes. But, you know, we're all social animals, and we want to interact with other people. And this excitement of staying at home and kind of saving ourselves the commuting time, that worked for a couple of weeks, but then that excitement for most people kind of turned into, oh, this is pretty boring, and I want to get back to my colleagues and I want to interact. And we see that development really also on the productivity side. At the beginning, productivity was pretty high at home, but then it really came down over time because people were not inspired anymore at their own place at home to start their own workday. It's also a question of kind of getting structure into the day and focus. When you kind of get to an office during your commute, you get your head focused on what's coming during the day, and vice versa. When you're going home, you're getting your head back into, oh, now this is leisure time. This is what I'm doing in the evening. And so I think people are also a little bit missing that type of structure they had before.
Yeah, that commute idea is really important, and obviously how we not just mentally get prepared to work, but how we physically get there. How closely are you paying attention to public transit plans and other things that cities are going to have to do to make it possible for people to get to their offices once they're open?
I think this is a really critical factor, and I think that is some of the biggest changes we will see post-COVID. So it's frankly not necessarily within the buildings, but it is around of the buildings the biggest change. I mean, transportation, public transportation is obviously of very different quality when you go around the world. But what it has usually in common in many places, that in the really super large cities of the world, think about London, Paris, or New York, that it is really, really crowded. It is not necessarily a great experience to use it. And that has to change. So we will see a very significant increase in investment into public transportation. And what we see in some of the countries which are most advanced around train rides, think about Japan or France or even Germany, where you have a very comfortable environment on a train and you can work there and you have high-speed internet and all those things. That also has to move into kind of your local public transportation. Why can't you have a decent seat in a tube where you have a nice high-speed internet connection where you can also work? I mean, this is way out and there needs to be significant investment, but I think that is what we will see. The other thing is that other ways of getting to the offices will have to embark. I mean, we have a couple of examples. Think about Amsterdam and Copenhagen, where people are easily using a bike to get into the office, even from quite distance. They overcome 10, 15 kilometers of distancing every morning and every afternoon. Whereas in other cities of the world, this is literally impossible. I mean, I was always using that example of the Fifth Avenue in New York, where you have 5 or 6 lines going one direction. I mean, why can't we take 2 of those lines away and turn it into a real fast bike track so that people can use their bikes to get to work so that they don't have to use the tube?
There are definitely discussions in New York now about making the city more bike friendly. It certainly has not been part of the city's history, but I think there are some acknowledgements that things are going to have to change for people to get around the city comfortably and safely. Aside from transit, how else do you see things opening up differently in different parts of the world? You have real estate everywhere. Do you think the return to offices will play out differently in different parts of the world, not just in terms of the timeline, but in terms of what the office will actually look like or what it would be used for?
Well, the built environment has always been also a reflection of local cultures. And you can see that also in offices. You can see it within the US where you have vast differences between the different cities in the US, and you certainly see it when you leave the US into other parts of the world. And on top of that, in some countries, you have massive local regulation around the configuration of office use. So generally speaking, we will obviously see more space per employee. I mean, we are coming from a world where over the last 20 years, we have reduced space per employee, and we have enhanced the open areas, the collaborative areas within offices, but your specific work desk space has been reduced. In some parts like Asia, also to the extent that you don't have assigned desks anymore, and you have a very low desk ratio overall. Whereas in other parts of the world, people tend to have their assigned desks still, and they still put their pictures on the table, and in some cases it looks like a small living room. So that is, again, very cultural. What we will now see in the short term is that we have more space per employee again to obviously deliver on social distancing and to make people really feel comfortable in the office. At the end of the day, it all comes down to how you kind of increase the engagement level of the employees. You need engaged employees to have productive employees. So what's most important that we ask them the question, what do they want to experience in the office? What does them make them feel comfortable in the office? And that is the critical piece. And that's where everybody has to be quite adaptable according to the region where they are in.
A conversation I've been having with a number of people lately is the idea that this is maybe a reinvention of the office is maybe a two-step process where in the first phase, what makes us comfortable won't be the things that we want out of an office in the second phase. That we want the safety and the feeling of security and the spacing from our colleagues, but that ultimately what we really want the office for long term is to be able to come together with our colleagues, to have those face-to-face interactions, to have a feeling of togetherness for company culture, for an all-hands meeting where you can have 150 people in a large multi-purpose room. And that's just not going to be possible when we first re-enter the office. You talked about having giving people a great experience on the first day back. What does that look like to you? What do you think the office of the near-term future actually looks like for people?
Well, it's exactly what you just said, because right in that very moment, people are expecting a different environment than they may want to see in 1 year from now or 2 years from now. So on the first day, people coming back after 3-4 months, there's a lot of uncertainty. So what we recommend to our clients and what we do for our own employees, we create videos from their office space, what they are going to expect when they come back into the office. They can see already what kind of signage there will be in a high-rise building to get to the elevators, how they should use the elevators, and how they get from the elevators into their designated workspace, because we have completely assigned work desk now for them so that they have their own space, which makes them feel comfortable. They have arrangement on how they are getting to kind of food and drinks and those type of things. And then we try to offer them as much as possible. It's not everywhere in our footprint, but in an employee experience app, which they have, which gives them constant information, what's going on, what they have to be considered about, and so on and so on, so that they really feel cared about their health and well-being.
Yeah, you mentioned signage, which strikes me as sort of a lo-fi form of technology that will be entering offices. What other kinds of technology do you think we'll see adopted in real estate right now as a result of COVID?
Well, there are all kinds of things. I mean, one of the most important areas at the moment are sensors. And in the past, sensors have been used to kind of measure density for the purpose of increasing the density. At the moment, sensors are being used for measuring density in the sense of social distancing. So it's quite funny how you use a tool for the complete opposite now, but it's still a great tool. And if you think about those sensor technologies, and you may know that we are very supportive of WordSense, one of the companies. We have a tiny little investment, but we believe in that technology very much so, because it will also allow you to observe if a space has been vacated by a colleague, let's say a meeting room or another a phone booth, that you can immediately get cleaners there to clean it up and make it safe again for the next user. And so there's all kinds of usage now for those sensors. The employee experience app, and there are different ways of employee experience app, but that is something which gives them a lot of comfort. And you can use that as a tool within the building, but you can also use it as a tool to connect the building, for example, to public transportation. If you can use those type of experience app to say, listen, the train you wanted to use looks to be very, very dense. Why don't you kind of take the train half an hour later, which is supposedly offering much more space? Again, that will give a lot of comfort to the employees. So I think this is just going back to my earlier point. We are seeing a massive acceleration of technology on the back of that COVID crisis, which would have found its way into our world anyway, but at a much slower pace.
So, Christian, when you're thinking about technology and its role in the employee experience, I mean, right now, as you mentioned, companies are sort of indexing toward creating safe spaces for employees and the distance that they want. But will this technology also come at a cost to the employee experience? Maybe to the point where they say, I don't know if I want to be in an office, or is the hope that we all just adjust to the procedures and the technology that's there and say, well, this is the trade-off for the pleasure of being able to go into an office every day and get away from home for a bit?
Well, I think it depends very much on the individual circumstances and frankly, the local culture. If you are living in a big house and you have your own nice office at home and you have the bandwidth and all the tools you need, you may have a relatively high barrier to really be drawn into the office and pulled into the office. Whereas if you are living in a very tiny little apartment and you may even share that apartment with somebody else and you don't have a home office, you accept a lot of constraints to get into the office. At the end of the day, we have to really look at what makes sense for the employees and how do we get them engaged. And then you have people who will find it perfectly normal to kind of have sensors all over the place and that the data is being collected because they would share that data anyway. I don't want to generalize here, but we have a much lower barrier around that in most parts of Asia than we have, for example, in continental Europe, where people are super concerned about anything which happens around that data, and they don't even like any sensor, which is kind of only observing whether they are in the office or not. And I think the US tends to be somewhere in the middle between Asia and Europe. And so these things have to be considered. But generally speaking, I think people are very open to any kind of tool which helps them to have a better experience in the office. That's why we call it experience apps.
Absolutely. So what would you say as we look to the future, what would you say is the single biggest opportunity in CRE technology?
Well, at the end of the day, we are having the opportunity to collect a vast amount of data. And we are just at the absolutely beginning of collecting that data and then analyzing that data and turning it into something valuable for the occupiers, but also for the owners of real estate. And I think this COVID crisis will bring a boost to use technology, to accept the opportunity which is offered by technology, and that will bring completely new approaches on how we use now data and turn it into something meaningful. I was always kind of surprised to see how much in the real estate world is kind of still just being driven by gut feel of people, whereas hard facts are not being used. I mean, it still happens that sometimes a CFO is telling me very proudly that they were able to renew their lease agreement at a certain rent level, and that is kind of the measure point they use, the rent per square feet, whereas that is one very, very small aspect. At the end of the day, you have to look at how productive, how engaged are people in your workplace. And the rental level can be significantly higher in building A compared to building B, but still your overall outcome in building A is also significantly higher because people are more engaged and more productive. And so data will allow us to produce the right KPIs, and then those KPIs will help people to define what makes sense and what doesn't make sense.
So it's interesting because I suspect if I had asked you that question 6 months ago, your answer would have been largely the same, that the big opportunity is in data, and maybe we use it slightly differently now than we would have before the pandemic, but that's still the opportunity in your eyes.
You're absolutely right. And you know, there's a lot of negative things on the back of that COVID crisis, no doubt about it. But there are also a few positive things coming. And I mean, we are within JLL on a long journey now to turn ourselves much more into a technology company focusing on real estate services. And obviously I have a high sense of urgency there. And what I have seen over the last couple of months, that in some areas we made tremendous progress. I mean, actually we achieved targets which I saw ourselves achieving only at the end of 2021. We achieved it at the end of the second quarter because people are acknowledging much more than before the need for technology and the need for accurate data, and they are willing to play. Because at the end of the day, it only works if it is attraction for the people to use that data and to use that technology.
Absolutely. If you look even beyond the pandemic for a minute, how do you think tech will transform real estate in the very long term? What do offices look like, say, 20 years from now? Do they account for all of those things that you were just mentioning? The idea that something might cost a little more, but it extracts that much more value from the employee experience, and so therefore I make the calculated decision that it's worth it, or I want to reconfigure my space because I have some new purpose that I want to achieve. What do you think this means for what the office actually looks like as a result of tech transforming real estate, if it works in the way that you describe?
Well, let me talk very quickly or use very quickly the example of retail. What we have seen in the retail space over the last 10 years, when kind of online retailing has become very important, physical retailing has moved into either convenience retailing or experience retailing. So you either go into a store physically because it's more convenient to buy a pack of milk or Coke in a store physically, and that tends to be stores next to the tube station or next to your home, or you go shopping physically because you want to have an experience. If you take that theme and transfer that to offices, an office has to either be much more convenient for you because, for example, you don't have the right space at home, and so it's more convenient for you to get into an office, or it has to be a fantastic experience for you. What I would like to see in an office is if we use kind of our laptops or iPads for video conferencing at home, in the office you may have rooms where you can just walk in and you have a total experience of being with your colleagues as if you are in the same room, but in fact you are 10 hours flight away from each other. It will be hard to get that into everybody's home in the near future, but it would be relatively easy over the next 10 years to have that in the offices. So that is something where I would see technology really making a difference, that we can create an environment in the office where you have virtual meetings which feel like physical meetings. And that is one important factor. The other important factor will always be that you have your colleagues around you and you can really innovate and be creative. And that is very hard to do that remotely. So that is an environment, again, which we have to create in an office with all the technology which helps you to do so. But at the end of the day, it just needs your colleagues. So a very physical aspect there as well.
So thinking about the emerging technology that businesses should have on their radar for the future, whether you want to think about that short term or a longer view, I leave that up to you. What is your recommendation for how businesses should be thinking about what they'll be investing in?
Well, if I had that answer, investing into technology as a non-technology company will always mean that you accept failure and that you accept an overspend. I mean, depending where you are as an organization, when I go back to JLL, when we went on that road to become much more technology-driven company, many years back, I could write down what would be the most efficient way to get to that outcome, but I knew it wouldn't work because culturally we weren't there. So we had to accept an inefficient way to get to that point, just to get the culture of the organization alongside. And I think that is almost the most critical part when you invest into technology. You need to kind of take your colleagues with you on that journey. And that means a different thing in different organizations, depending where the starting point is. And then secondly, we have to train people around technology. What I'm constantly experiencing is that we have great new tools, but we are not spending enough time on training our people on those tools. The trouble is that, you have experienced, mature colleagues, leaders, whoever, who wouldn't acknowledge that they need that training. So they are not participating in the usual training which you offer, and then afterwards you see that they're not using the tool. And so we have to find a way where people accept that they need to train on that technology without feeling embarrassed or losing face. Interestingly enough, for private usage of any kind of applications, people are very willing to kind of ask friends, ask their children to use the tool, but when it comes to professional usage, they are not that open to ask other people, and that's something we have to overcome. I think that is one of the biggest barriers, that people are not trained to use that technology.
I think that's exactly right. I've talked to a number of CEOs in the past couple of weeks who have told me that that they previously maybe had one way of connecting audio visually to say their grandchildren, and now because they're working from home and having to connect with their teams, their senior management groups, they now have a million different devices and platforms that they now understand how to use and feel so much more equipped to do that. And sometimes it is just a matter of getting used to it. What would you say is the biggest, what is the tip that you would give to other companies about or what was the example that you would show people from JLL's experience to be getting more comfortable with technology? What's one thing that you did or that the company did that you think has made the biggest difference in that regard?
Well, I don't know whether I can bring that example. I mean, I think I personally used all kinds of tools. I mean, the kind of the threat of disruptors, showing how other industries have been disrupted, showing how we as an industry are starting to be disrupted, but then moving very quickly from the threat to the opportunity side and showing what kind of great successes people have managed to deliver with our own organization by using its existing tools which we have and combining them in a smart way. I mean, the beauty when you run a global company, you are having people with lots of creativity and wisdom all around the world, and there's a great idea in China or a great idea in Australia, and the next day you hear about a great idea in Ireland, and then you kind of try to move that best practice around the world, show those examples, and then other people will pick up on it. And that is first of all, it's a real pleasure to see it happening. And on the other hand, it really drives the whole organization along forward. I mean, we have currently within our US organization, a former broker who totally gets now excited about technology over the last couple of months during COVID. And he's constantly coming up with new ideas how we can combine existing tools. And we feed that back into our technology experts, and they are now trying to build that up more professionally. But it is really exciting to see what ideas are now coming up.
Close us out with this, Christian. Do you miss the office? Are you excited to go back?
Well, I definitely miss meeting my colleagues. I mean, I have been, before COVID, I have been on the road for about 200 days a year. So I'm not assigned to a single office. I'm traveling around the globe. And so what I'm really missing is the personal interaction with colleagues, having a meal together, having a drink together. That is really, I mean, after so many months, I haven't been on a plane since the end of February. And so I'm really looking forward to meeting people again in person.
Hopefully we will all get to that place very soon. Thank you so much for being with us.
Absolutely. Thank you.